Eat up with tax, don't know what to do. The Brysons are here for you. We know every tip and trick. The serious tax talk with the Louisiana twist.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of Talkin Tax, serious tax talk with the Louisiana twist. I'm Kerry Bryson, and I have my law partner and spouse, Angie Bryson, with me here today to make sure
Hey, everybody.
we keep this thing on the rails. So,
My job.
yeah, it's been your job for a while, I think.
A metaphor of life right here.
We do have a great story we could talk
Not
about.
today.
That was a great story. We may have to do that. Okay, first, though, we got to do a little work here. We're getting a lot of questions about the employee retention credit.
Yeah.
People saying all kind of things. It was another giveaway, another government deal, but we're going to try to clarify a few things about what it is and what it's not, and how you qualify and how you don't qualify, and what you need to qualify. Kind of give you the ups and downs and kind of go through everything, at least our process here at the company, at the law firm, how we're handling the employee retention credit.
Well, we did a prior podcast kind of. No, I think it's important to recap. But I mean, I think the objective here is what you said. It's to figure out the best way to make those claims and get your analysis done and how we're different.
All right.
The Bryson way.
Well, let's start then. Why don't you tell us, let's kind of recap. What is the employee retention credit?
Is that for me?
Yeah. You want me to do it?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So the employee retention credit, what I tell everybody, it's a refundable tax credit, okay, that the employers are entitled to take against the employment taxes that they pay. It was all part of the COVID relief plan, the CARES Act, that came out. In the beginning, the initial release of the CARES Act, when it first came out, it was mutually exclusive with the PPP alone. So you had to do one or the other. You couldn't do both.
So the first big myth is that you can, if I got PPP, I cannot do ERC. That's the myth, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And that myth is still out there. That's why Angie's bringing that up, I guess, to make sure that, like I tell y'all, she'll keep us on the rails today. So back to the CARES Act. And so what happened is most everybody did the PPP. Most employers that sought relief went after the PPP because it was quicker. At the time, the country had just shut down. Everybody was in the PPP, the Congress is meeting and trying to figure out how we're going to have an economy when nobody's working, nobody's doing anything. So they offered the PPP, the CARES Act was part of it. There was the EIDL, the disaster loan, there was an SBA loan. There was a bunch of different facets of relief that Congress came up with. And one was this employee retention credit.
Right. So
most employers chose the PPP rather than the ERC because the PPP was easier, quicker, and it was a forgivable thing, and you got your money quick, real quick.
And the first version of the CARES Act, it was an either or thing.
Yeah, it was. That's what I said.
PPP,
right,
or credits, right?
So in later versions, as it came out as the CARES Act, and it now it's no longer mutually exclusive. You can get both,
right?
And so there's Angie's myth myth number one, that she pointed out, that's not true. The myth that you can't do both is incorrect. You can do both. However, on the ERC, you have to qualify. It's not just an automatic. It's not based on the number of employees. It is based on that, but you don't get it just because you had employees. The purpose of the employee retention credit is to compensate the businesses who stayed in business. So there you got to stay in business, who stayed in business during COVID and chose to keep their employees despite the rough times that the whole country was undergoing.
Risky business back then.
So you stayed in, and so it's kind of a reward. It is a credit. Okay. It's not a grant. It's not a loan. Not anything you have to forgive. It's not a handout. It's actually a tax credit. It's one of the few tax credits. It's the only tax credit really that the small businesses can get. That I know there's many credits for small businesses. So anyway, and that's what it is. So it's basically a percentage of qualified wages that were given to eligible employees between March of 2020 and through the third quarter of 2021. So it's 6 quarters. It's for 6 consecutive quarters, beginning with the second quarter
2020
of 2020. You go second, third, fourth of 2020, and then the first, second, third of 2021.
Right.
And there's various things per this each. Well, let's say 2020 is treated differently than 2021. As an example, in 2020, your credit is 50% of the qualified wages up to a max of $5,000 per employee for the year for all 3 quarters. So you can get max out per employee $5,000 for 2020 for all 3 quarters. Now, with that being said, the PPP loan also comes into play here, because if you used wages to have your PPP loan forgiven, those wages can then not be this subject of getting a credit. So you can't get the credit for the ERC and have your PPP loan forgiven based on the same wages. So we have to back out the wages. That's why in every case we always have to get the loan forgiveness application.
That's one of the things in our process that we're going to kind of walk
that's
through.
why,
right?
Because I've seen a lot of calculations done incorrectly. To do the calculation done correctly, you have to back out the people. So you actually got to get the loan forgiveness application.
See where it was.
To see what was used to forgive the loan, because there were several things that you could have used: wages, rent, utilities. There was a bunch of things you could use.
Right.
And then anyway, so it's $5,000 for the 2020 for all 3 quarters. But in 21, credit is much greater. It's 70% of qualified wages paid to the eligible employees, and the credit is increased to $7,000 per employee per quarter.
Right.
So if you have an employee that fully qualifies, it's now $21,000 for the 21 quarters, and you still got the 5. So the total you can get, the max you can get per employee is $26,000 per employee, assuming you qualify for the whole thing.
Right. Every quarter.
Yes. So the other point I'd like to make, and I keep emphasizing, is assuming you qualify. Yes, there is a qualification. Okay.
Right.
It was designed, the ERC credit is designed for employers who had a significant decline in gross receipts. Okay. And we call that revenue reduction around here. And depending on the year, it's 50% in the 2020 quarters and 20% reduction in the 21 quarters compared to 2019, the same quarter in 19.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Very hard test. Some people do qualify, and of course, it's very straightforward. This is the one I always say the CPAs love, because this is straightforward. You get the P&Ls, you get the books, and you could tell in a matter of time. The ones the CPAs do not love, and the one the lawyers do, I think,
like
full or partial suspension of business due to a government order. And it now gets kind of legal, I would say, for lack of a better word. And now it's kind of like Angie said, it's a blank slate. So we're able to understand and analyze each situation and show that the employers were partially suspended or fully suspended in some cases pursuant to the government order. I would say directly by, you can't have but 50 occupancy in your building and you're a restaurant. Well, that's probably a partial shutdown of your business as we look at it, because there's a percentage test that we need. It has to be more than a nominal impact on your business,
which the IRS says is 10%.
It's 10% impact on your business, not due to income.
It's interesting. So how do you a subjective?
You do. The way, the easy one is like a restaurant.
Right.
Well, I had 20 tables. I could only do 10 tables. That's 50% of my tables. So that's more than 10% of the operation. So that's more than a nominal impact of my business.
There's an infinite number of examples.
Yes. And that's where you go. And that's why, like I said, that's why the lawyers kind of like this, because we can, and the CPAs not necessarily, because it's not as black and white.
Sure.
The indirect way, which is going to probably be the most litigated and the most, I guess, where the most fraud would happen, and there'll be the most audits, would be that this partial suspension occurs because of a supply chain disruption that occurred due to a governmental order. Because if we all recall I know no one likes to remember because nobody likes to talk about the COVID shutdown, and particularly what the time that we like to recall. But there was a supply chain disruptions across the country in almost every product, every industry. Yeah. Everything was suffering. But it can't be that you can't just say I had a supply chain disruption. You have to tie the supply chain disruption to a COVID order for it to be able to recover into the ERC, because the ERC was designed to assist those employers who kept operating in light of all these governmental orders. So you can't just say a supply chain disruption. I couldn't find fuel. Why couldn't you find fuel? Then we got to find, and you got to track it down. So anyway, I'll just make that point kind of in the recap to do that. Yeah. The thing that I find, one of the most interesting and ironic things in this, very similar to our law firm, in the tax resolution, there's a lot of fraud in that industry. There's a lot of national companies that come in and advertise, and they're jumping in the space. Yeah. And they have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea. They don't really care. All they're doing is signing up people, taking their money, and they're gone. And it's the same thing is happening, I believe, I'll see it in the ERC arena. It's the same thing. These national companies are coming in. Everybody's jumping in the arena. They think it's easy money. Let's go after it. And there is credits. They are legal. They are valid credits, but you do have to qualify for them. So I would recommend that if you're interested in the credits, just like I do in the resolution world, you don't have to call the law. You don't have to call us. Just call a law firm that does these credits. Don't call these national marketing companies, because when the audits come around, and we can talk about that too, because we are starting to get a few audits.
Yeah, we actually,
not of our work, but another company did another claim, and the audits are already coming. Right. And they've called us to defend them now in the audit. So, which we're glad to do it. And we're going to, in that case, we're going to fix it, and we're going to get it right. So, but anyway, I just find that it's the same. It's kind of, I could use
song and dance.
It's the same deal. It's the same thing. Don't hire those high pressure out of town salesmen. I know I've been saying that in ads and commercials for 10, 15 years now. And it's the same. It's the true. It's true for this arena as well.
I was reflecting on how we got in this space, right? Actually today. And I think God put us here for a reason, right? Because we've seen so many people pouring money and effort into their potential cases. I mean, on the resolution side, into their cases, and maybe here as well. And they're hoping for a good result, but they're not getting counsel at all. But frankly, in some situations, we didn't find ourselves here by accident. I think that we've got a tried and true method on how to handle cases for clients, and we put together this presentation today to help people understand what that looks like. It's not just a phone call where you punch in a bunch of numbers. Just to get into it, the first step in our process is you make a phone call, or you send in a web inquiry to Bryson Law Firm, basically. And then we schedule a visit with one of our attorneys. The onboarding team will take over, and there's a questionnaire that you've got to fill out. All of this is online. It's pretty seamless. So it's pretty impressive. I'm not going to lie, the system that they put together, and then that we've developed. And then you'll have your meeting. And then if you want to engage us, we'll send over an engagement agreement. Now, the thing about this engagement agreement is it's built around the credit. We don't collect fees unless the credits actually come through, right? So it's a little different than a typical law firm engagement on the resolution side of the house. So that's step one, is you engage us, right? You meet with us and hire us, basically. So, and that's virtual. We've done consults for clients all over the country. So it's a pretty easy step one.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So unless you want me to do step two, or do you want to do step two? Here's where the fun begins. Once you've engaged, like I was telling you before, there are at least the claims that we're going to handle, the law firm's going to handle. We are going to document our claims and get our file documented. I mean, basically what I tell our clients, look, the audit period for these claims was extended, and they were extended for a reason. to give the IRS more time to look at these claims, because I think they're fully expecting to have a lot of claims coming.
Sure.
So the IRS did have not the IRS, they had the foresight to go into Congress to get additional time to do these audits. So, and they were given. So there is an extended period of time of the audit. So I know what I'm telling people is that we're going to prepare your file as if you're being audited, and we're going to prepare it now, because we know in 4 years from now, when the IRS comes knocking, if they ever do, if they come knocking, we're not going to remember what exactly we did during COVID, and we're not probably going to have some of the records that we would need to have, and we're not going to remember certain things. So we build the file now as if we're under audit. Probably, I would say, a little bit more than, well, I know it's more than the national companies, because I've seen what they're doing, and they're doing absolutely nothing. So those people who get audited won't even have documents. I mean, they won't have anything. So
you'll have to assemble the case.
Yeah, you basically have to assemble the case on the backside. Mm-hmm. Okay. We're assembling the case up front. So then we're going to take it, we're going to save it in our file. We're going to give the client a copy of their file. And so they have a roadmap of what happens as to why they claimed the credit for each quarter. What was the basis, what they were relying on? It was a government order, what governmental order, and how it affected them. Kind of just, I like sewing the case up in a nice little package, putting it on the shelf. The IRS ever comes, which they may or may not, who knows. If they ever do, though, our clients are going to be ready for that, if that would ever to happen. Right. So the second process really is to start gathering these documents. There's kind of two sets of documents, though.
Right.
The most straightforward way, as I mentioned, is the revenue reduction. So we're always going to go there first, because those are simple. So we're going to get all the income records that we can get.
Well, they're not simple. They're just...
they're simpler than the others, what I mean.
In the sense of analysis.
It's just straightforward way.
Right.
It's either you do or you don't.
Right.
It's not a lot of analysis. We can't change the numbers on P&Ls.
There are a lot of people who are not qualifying on revenue reduction.
Yeah, still qualify.
Yeah.
I think most people don't qualify for revenue reduction. Like I mentioned, the test for revenue reduction is pretty
hard.
It's pretty harsh. I mean,
it's gross revenue.
Yes. So it's not a lot of, there's not a lot of people, but some do. And if you do, of course, that's the method you'd want to use, because it's very straightforward. There's not a lot of argument there back and forth. It's either you do or you don't.
Right.
But I kind of go, there's two ways. So we get that, but there's also to do the calculation to determine the eligible employees to 70% of the qualified wages, to back out the PPP loan information. So we'll start asking for those documents as well. To do the financial documents, to do the calculation to determine the amount of the credit.
Right.
And then also the financial documents to verify a revenue reduction claim or to rule it out. And then we know, so that's kind of the first set, I think, is we kind of get that to kind of get us a good credit calculation, and also rule out or rule in revenue reduction. Then usually, I think at that point, it always seems that we meet again with the clients and we kind of tell them where we are. Okay, your credit calculation is, if you qualify for these quarters, you get this amount of money. And then if this is what you're looking for, but you don't qualify for revenue reduction here and here. So we need to think about this. And what was happening? What were you doing in your business here? What did I do? Well, I had to close my storefront down. I had to go work from home. I had to do whatever industry they were in. And we go through how they reacted to COVID as business owners. What did they do? What did you do in your business? How did you operate in that environment when you weren't allowed to? Because the governmental orders, I probably should have mentioned that. The focus of the governmental orders was limiting travel, limiting group meetings or social gatherings, and limiting commerce. And that's the language in the IRS circular, which is the guidance interpreting the CARES Act that from the IRS side. They're kind of picking up on that, and they're kind of using that language as well. So we're kind of tying everything to those. So that's what we do. So usually at that meeting, we will tell.
We also have a questionnaire that we send out. Relative to that, just to get the basic gist.
Yeah, I probably should have mentioned that. There's our questionnaires that go out before we meet.
Yeah.
So we have an idea.
Right.
And then after that meeting, we're drilling down now on specific cases or specific supplies that are critical goods that we're looking for.
Where are they coming from?
Where are they coming from? where the invoice is showing they're back ordered. Why are they back ordered?
Memos,
text, anything, gathering all the documents.
One we worked on this week
Yes.
with a lot of calendar appointments that were canceled.
You could show
that they couldn't get in.
Very common.
Didn't have parts to do their work. I mean, there was
whatever. Each industry
it's really kind of an interesting.
Well, each case is different.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
And each industry has their own issues. So that's kind of the second step, is that we'll get through the calculation and we'll get through the revenue reduction analysis. Then we're going to move on, if necessary, which it usually is, to move into doing the analysis of how they qualify.
Yeah. Well, and we'll meet with the client. We meet with clients to discuss our findings, gather more information and probe. What about this? What about that? I know that Carrie met with a client this week, and he actually it was an EMS client, and he couldn't get another unit, right?
Yes.
Couldn't get an ambulance. And that's huge. So, I mean, he couldn't even service the clients.
Definitely a critical good for an ambulance.
Critical good. Yeah. Right. So that's a good example.
Yeah. But then the reason was why?
Right.
Well, it was why they couldn't, the dealership, we get them from this dealership.
Dealer couldn't get it from
the dealer. So you got to go through the process, drilling down and asking why, and relating it to a COVID order and not just some other reason.
Yeah. So pretty much everything goes back to the shut down ports all over the world. And the where.
And foreign ports as well.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got everything. So now we got a client I've given you everything. And what's next for me?
File the credit. We'll roll out, hey, you qualify for these, and then we'll put together the package. It gets your approval on the calculation.
So how's the credit made? So you file the 941X.
Yes.
You have to amend the 941.
Like a law school hypothetical. I'm not sure where you're taking.
Well, you're the one that keeps us on the rails. So I'm just kind of making sure we're staying on the rails.
Yeah.
No. The point I was going to is that
I see, yes.
There was a 941X, which is the payroll returns has to be amended. And when you get the credit, some people aren't being told this, and you need to know this. It's worth it. I'm not saying don't do it, but you just need to know that when you amend your 941X, that then triggers a requirement for you to amend the income tax return for you, depending on what type of business you are, whether you're going to be your personal and your Schedule C, or whether it's a corporation, you're going to do the 11, or your partnership, or all of it. You have to amend the income tax return because you're reducing the expenses, the payroll expenses. You're reducing the payroll expenses that were taken on that return. And probably your 2020 and maybe even your 21 return probably have already been filed. Now you've got less expenses because you just got a big credit. So you need to go back and amend to reflect the correct amount of expenses. And the IRS has indicated they are going to be looking for this. They've also indicated they're going to be lenient with penalties on it. In other words, because as soon as you file the amendment 941, you file the X, technically you have a duty to amend at that point. But most people are going to wait until they get the checks to make sure everything's good, to make sure the IRS accepts it. So in this 6-month period, there is a penalty that would be applied. And the IRS has said they're going to be lenient with these penalties. And for them to say they're going to be lenient, I don't think I've ever heard them say that. But
I think that the way that we have decided to handle that would be request abatement of any penalties with the amendment of those tax returns. So you're a good CPA or tax pro would know to do that with your amended return.
Right. Yeah. You're going to request the amendment. Yeah. Yes. And even if you have to pay a penalty, it would be substantially less than the amount of the credit. It's still worth it. But with the IRS saying that they're going to be lenient, I think that most of those penalties will be abated. Yeah. Assuming that you file it promptly, probably would get checks.
Right.
And things like that.
Right.
And if you wait years and years, you may have a problem with amending that. So
I do want to back up a little bit. So one thing that we do, I think that's probably really unique. I don't know of anybody else who would do this, but when we file the returns or when we engage, we actually file with the IRS a limited power of attorney, which allows us to track your returns and how they're processing in the IRS world and pull transcripts so we can see, okay, they've received them, they're processing them, and then we can actually see by pulling the transcripts whether they're funded. So it's a pretty cool part of our system, and it's served us well because lots of clients are asking us, where's my stuff? What's happening? And so we can instantly tell, well, they don't have them, or yes, they do have them, but they're pending and whatnot. So that
and usually when they pick them up, after they're pending, they pick them up. Oh,
right.
they're probably, oh yeah, they're coming.
We kind of know the timeline.
You're getting to be a few weeks out now.
Typically,
Yeah.
yes, right. So
yeah. So to answer the question though, I'm telling people 6 months, 7 months, 8 months sometimes.
I mean, I like the 8 months.
Quicker. I'm always going to exaggerate it probably alongside.
Pretty slow.
Yeah. So it's pretty slow. It's not a quick process. You amend the returns. There are a lot of returns being filed, a lot of amended returns, because there are a lot of people claiming the credit.
We send our certified mail with a return receipt, and that also allows us to track the day that the IRS receives them. Yeah. There's some other legal implications for claiming the credit and making sure you do it timely on the law side. So we do that for that reason as well.
Yes. Yeah. And then the checks will come. They will be paper checks that will go, it will come in the mailbox to you.
Multiple, one for each.
And then we have to, then we usually get the checks and audit them to the return to make sure they're in the proper amount, because we have had a few that were not correct. So you got to make sure they're correct as part of the representation process. We got to make sure that the money is accurate and the claims are accurate. And then as lawyers, we have to do the settlement statement and that and account for the attorney's fees and things like that.
But we don't get paid until the checks come.
Correct.
Right.
All the work that we're doing is on a contingency basis.
Right.
So, yeah. So it's contingent upon receipt of the funds.
But I mean, just to back up. So if you file 4 quarters, if you claim the credits on 4 quarters, you would get 4 checks.
Right.
Different envelopes, they come in. Or if you did 6, then you'd get 6 checks. So it's not one big check, basically.
Yes.
It's very likely like you may get 1 check today, 2 tomorrow. They don't necessarily all come together. Sometimes
I don't think we've had one yet come together. So.
All right.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, but.
Yes. And then as our final step, I think if we haven't already, we will get the client a tax opinion letter that just outlines the basis. I think I mentioned that earlier. We just make sure, then that's what you'll put that with all your supporting documents in a safe place.
And we keep
through
those.
the audit period. And we also keep
a digital file as well.
Yeah.
So
that's it. I think that's it.
It's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot there. A lot of work.
It's also evolving, right? So this is a kind of a new area of, credit claiming law, tax credits.
Well, there's not many credits that small businesses get.
Right. Yeah.
So it is a very new area. And I mean, as lawyers, as lawyers, we're used to reading cases and the judges kind of interpret everything for us. So we kind of have an idea of how the law is going to be interpreted and used. But in this instance, there's no case yet.
And landscape.
So it's very open. Basically, we have in interpretation of lawyers who have written about this, various periodicals and articles of what they see and don't see. We have, of course, CPAs do the same. And then I guess a lot of people are relying on the IRS circulars. So the IRS has written 2 or 3 circulars addressing certain issues and questions and giving examples of how they are interpreting or wanting to interpret the act. I think in some cases they're probably going to be wrong. Imagine that. But anyway, I think
that's not dispositive.
It's they're not dispositive. It's just it's just guidance. It's what's called guidance. So we can get kind of an idea, a feel of what the IRS is thinking or looking for. And in some areas, I do believe will be challenged by certain people who want to challenge. So, and ultimately it'll come out. So anyway,
that's definitely,
that's kind of the employee retention credit and kind of how we handle it, at least in our companies and what we're doing. It's a little bit different.
Do you have
I would
any
say.
Questions? Just
sure. And if you want to explore whether your company qualifies for the retention credit, when you want to try to qualify, certainly contact us today. We'll contact Bryson Law Firm and we'll be glad to take a look at it. Okay. All right.
Well, for Carrie, for me, thanks for listening today. If you have any employee retention credits, shoot them our way. You can find us at brysonlawfirm.com. Have a great one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.